Millionaire kicked his pregnant wife out. 20 years later she returned with twins for revenge. Before we dive into this emotional story, drop a comment below. Where in the world are you watching from? Hit the subscribe button and turn on notification to see more stories like this. Richard Harrington's rise to success wasn't driven by luck. It was his hunger for more, his single-minded pursuit of wealth, that pushed him to do whatever it took. Starting with nothing but a few strategic moves in real estate, Richard clawed his way to the top, leaving behind those who couldn't keep up. He crushed rivals, made ruthless deals, and played a game where the stakes were high and the consequences were even higher. By his 30s, Richard had everything: money, power, status. But with that success came arrogance. He believed that no one could challenge him, that no one could understand the pressure of his life. The people around him, including his wife, Sarah, became nothing more than background noise. He spent his days with high-powered business associates, always pushing for more. He thought that his ambition alone was enough to build the future he wanted, and that Sarah would be there to enjoy it with him, no matter what. Sarah, on the other hand, was a woman defined by loyalty. She wasn't from his world of big deals and fast cars, but she loved Richard with everything she had. As his empire grew, so did her devotion. She hosted lavish dinners for his business contacts, kept the house immaculate, and supported him through the long hours. But with every day that passed, she became more of a shadow in his life. The emotional distance grew slowly at first, then rapidly, until it was impossible to ignore. Richard's eyes would glaze over when she spoke, and he would brush off her attempts to talk. "I'm doing this for us," he would say, but Sarah could no longer feel his presence, even when he was physically there. She kept hoping things would change, that the man she married would return. But with each passing year, that hope faded. Then came the day Sarah discovered she was pregnant. At first, Sarah thought the news would bring them back together. She prepared Richard's favorite meal, her heart full of excitement for the future. But when she shared the news, Richard's reaction shattered her. His face twisted into disbelief, then anger. "That's not my kid," he snapped, his voice cutting through the room. Sarah froze, confusion flooding her mind. She couldn't understand it. "What are you talking about?" "Of course it's yours," she pleaded, tears welling up. Richard's words were sharp, full of venom. "I can't have children, Sarah. You've been lying to me. I know you've been with someone else." He accused her of infidelity, of betraying him when she had done nothing but stand by him through every challenge. The weight of his words crushed her, but it was the final blow that came next. Without a second thought, Richard kicked her out. He slammed the door in her face, leaving her alone in the dark, with nothing but her shattered heart and growing belly. The life they had built together had crumbled in an instant. Sarah found herself on the cold, unforgiving streets, with no one to turn to. She ended up in a women's shelter, surrounded by women who had their own stories of pain and loss. But there, in that shelter, Sarah found something she hadn't known she still had: strength. With the support of the other women, Sarah began to rebuild. It wasn't easy. She worked long hours, cleaning houses, waiting tables, doing whatever it took to survive. But every day, she reminded herself that this was for her children. She would make sure they had a better life. One she could give them on her own terms. In the quiet moments, when she was alone with her thoughts, Sarah felt a pang of despair. How could she have been so wrong about Richard? How could she have loved someone who had torn their family apart so easily? But as the days turned into months, and then years, something inside her hardened. Her children, Michael and Michelle, were born soon after. They weren't just her joy, they were her reason to keep going. She refused to let them grow up in a world of bitterness. No matter how tough things got, Sarah pushed forward. She built a life for them, one day at a time. And she did it without Richard, without his wealth, his support, and without his love. But the fire that burned inside Sarah was not just for survival. It was a fire for justice, for payback. As the years passed, she could feel the anger rise. Richard's life had continued without her, without his children, without any thought for what he'd lost. But that was about to change. Would you move on from Richard if you were in Sarah's shoes? Comment below. The years were not kind to Sarah, but she didn't let them break her. Every morning, before the sun even thought about rising, she was up, preparing for another long day. The bakery wasn't just her business, it was her lifeline. She started small, baking in the early hours and delivering pastries to nearby shops. Then, as word spread, her small operation grew. But success didn't come easy. It took hours of hard work, long shifts, sleepless nights, and the constant hustle of juggling motherhood and running a business. There were days Sarah was so exhausted she could barely keep her eyes open, but she had no choice. She couldn't afford to rest. Michael and Michelle were her priority, and she would do whatever it took to give them a life better than the one she'd known growing up. Slowly but surely, the bakery became a staple in the community. People came from all over just for a taste of her treats. With every sale, she built something new, not just for her children but for herself. But no matter how successful Sarah became, the truth about Richard never went away. Michael and Michelle were growing up, and the question of their father's absence loomed larger with every year. Michael, always the fiery one, often asked about his father. He wasn't the type to back down from anything, especially when it came to family. "Why don't we have a dad?" he would demand, his tone sharp. "Why did he leave us?" Sarah's answers were always vague, carefully crafted to avoid the pain of the past. "Your father had his reasons," she would say, hoping that would be enough. But it never was. Michelle, on the other hand, was more quiet, more observant. She noticed things, connected dots others didn't. While Michael's anger burned hot and fast, Michelle's questions were always calm, calculated. She wasn't satisfied with Sarah's explanations. Something didn't add up, and she was determined to find out what. As they entered their 20s, the twins grew more persistent. One evening, after dinner, Michelle spoke up. "Mom, we're not kids anymore. We deserve to know the full truth. Everything." Sarah hesitated. The time had come. With a sigh, she looked at them, both her children standing before her, strong and full of questions, and made a decision. "Your father, he wasn't who you think he was," she began, her voice low. "He built his fortune on ruthless deals, and when I got pregnant with you too, he accused me of cheating. He threw me out, without a second thought." Michael's face turned red. "He did that to you?" "To us." His fists clenched, his anger starting to bubble over. Michelle's expression was more measured, but the pain was still there. "He left us, Mom. And now we know why. What have we done to deserve any of this? Why are we still not part of his life?" Sarah sighed, her heart heavy. "I didn't want to tell you this before, but I think it's time you know. Richard never divorced me. He's still legally married to me. But that's not the worst of it. His business, he's been involved in shady deals, things he's kept hidden for years." The twins were silent, processing her words. Sarah wasn't sure whether she'd done the right thing, but she knew it had to be said. Michael was the first to speak. "That's it. He left us. And now we find out he's been hiding all this." His voice grew louder, full of disbelief and anger. "This isn't right. He needs to pay." Michelle, always the strategist, was already deep in thought. "We need to dig deeper. Find out everything about him, his business, his finances, his lies. He thinks he's untouchable, but we can change that." With a new sense of purpose, the twins went to work. They weren't just going to let their father continue living the life he'd built at their expense. They started researching, first looking into Richard's public records. They found out about his business dealings, about how his company had grown through questionable methods, stepping on the backs of others to get ahead. But it was the legal loopholes that really caught their attention. Michelle, using her sharp mind, discovered that Richard had never filed for divorce, meaning the marriage was still legally valid. That meant that Sarah still had rights to a portion of his wealth, something Richard had never considered. The twins dug deeper, sifting through public documents, uncovering whispers of shady transactions, and talking to people who had worked with Richard. It was clear now, Richard had built his empire on more than just ambition. He'd crossed lines, manipulated people, and covered his tracks well. But not well enough. Michael and Michelle were determined to expose him for what he really was. They were no longer the abandoned children of a millionaire. They were the ones in control now, and they were going to make Richard see that. As they made plans for what would come next, Michael's fire and Michelle's precision worked in perfect harmony. Michael wanted to go public, to shout their story from the rooftops, while Michelle focused on the legal angles, finding a way to make sure they had the upper hand. Together, they would make Richard face the consequences of his actions. The stage was set. The pieces were in place. But one question still remained: how far were they willing to go to make Richard pay? Who's Team Sarah here? Smash the like button if you're rooting for her. The twins had spent days preparing. Every detail was accounted for, every angle considered. Michael and Michelle knew exactly what they wanted: Richard's wealth. But more importantly, they wanted something much deeper, a reckoning. A chance to make him feel the weight of what he had done to their mother, to them, and to everyone he had trampled on along the way. Michael's fiery spirit demanded that they go straight to the heart of the matter. "We can't just ask him for a piece of the pie," he said, his fists clenched in determination. "We need leverage. We need to make sure he understands that we've got him cornered. We'll show him we know everything, his illegal deals, his shady past. And we'll force him to face it all." Michelle, calm and calculating, nodded in agreement. "We'll get what we deserve. We'll make sure he knows that we're not just his forgotten children, we're the ones who are going to change everything for him." Together, they devised a strategy that would hit Richard where it hurt the most. Michael would be the public face of their confrontation, demanding answers, while Michelle would silently work the legal angles. The day finally arrived. Sarah, although hesitant, stood strong beside her children. She wasn't sure what would come of this meeting, but she knew it was time. Time for Richard to understand that his actions had consequences, no matter how far he had run from them. As they arrived at Richard's mansion, Sarah's heart raced. The mansion loomed before them, its grandeur a stark reminder of everything Richard had built on lies and betrayal. She had once walked these halls as his wife, but today, she stood at the gates as a mother and a force to be reckoned with. Her children were no longer the ones abandoned on the doorstep, they were the ones holding the keys to Richard's future. They rang the gate's intercom, and a voice came through. "Harrington residence." "Who is it?" "It's Sarah Harrington," she said, her voice steady but firm. "I'm here with my children, Michael and Michelle. We need to speak with Richard." There was a long pause before the gate buzzed open. The silence was thick with anticipation as they walked toward the front door, the weight of their mission heavy in the air. As the door opened, Richard stood there, his face unreadable. His shock was evident, but it was quickly replaced by a defensive posture as he sized them up. Sarah took a deep breath, standing tall. "It's been 20 years, Richard," she said. "These are your children, Michael and Michelle. They wanted to meet you." Richard's eyes widened as he looked from Sarah to the twins. For a brief moment, he seemed to freeze, his face paling as the reality of the situation set in. His gaze shifted to Michelle and Michael, who both stood with unwavering confidence. His children. The ones he'd thrown away without a second thought. What is this?" Richard stammered, trying to regain his composure. Michael stepped forward, his voice cold. "We're here for what's ours, Richard. We've done our research. We know about your shady business deals, your lies, and your dirty secrets. You don't get to live in your perfect world anymore. Not while we're standing here." Michelle, ever the strategist, kept her calm. "We're not here to beg for anything. You left us to struggle while you built your empire. And now, we're taking what's rightfully ours. You've been hiding behind your wealth for too long. But we know the truth, and we're not afraid to expose it." Richard's face tightened, his mind racing. He had worked his entire life to protect his empire, to shield himself from the consequences of his actions. But now, faced with his children, grown and determined, he saw the threat they posed. The legal implications, the public exposure, it was all too much. "You think you can just waltz in here and take everything?" Richard snapped, trying to maintain control. "You don't know what you're dealing with. I built this empire. You think you can just tear it all down with a few accusations?" Michael's gaze was unwavering. "You don't get to play the victim here. You're the one who abandoned us. And now we're here to make sure you pay for everything you've done." The tension in the room thickened, each word from the twins hitting Richard harder than the last. He could feel his grip on the situation slipping. The weight of his empire, his reputation, was suddenly at risk. He wasn't sure if he could stop the damage the twins could do. And that realization shook him to his core. Michelle, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. "Here's the deal, Richard. We're not interested in destroying you. We're not even interested in taking everything. But we want 40% of your wealth. That's our right, as your children. And if you don't agree, we'll expose everything you've hidden, your deals, your lies, your corruption. You'll lose it all." Richard stared at them, his mind whirling. 40%. It was a massive amount of money, but the thought of losing everything he had worked for, the respect, the power, the legacy, was too much. He could feel the walls closing in on him. His business was built on manipulation, but even he knew that there were limits to how much he could cover up. For a long moment, there was silence. Richard's eyes flicked between Sarah and the twins, his internal battle raging. Should he risk everything to protect his empire, or should he give in and pay the price to avoid total destruction? Finally, Richard spoke, his voice low and resigned. "Fine. 40%. You get your share. But this is the last time you'll ever come near me again." Michael's face softened slightly, but Michelle didn't let her guard down. "We're not doing this for you. We're doing it for us, and for Mom." As they left the mansion, the twins walked away victorious. Richard had given in, and they had secured 40% of his wealth. The empire that he had spent a lifetime building was now partially in their hands. But more than that, they had exposed the truth. Richard had been forced to confront the consequences of his actions. Sarah, standing beside her children, felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. It wasn't just the money, it was the knowledge that Richard had finally faced what he owed to them. What would you do in Richard's shoes? Let us know in the comments. As Sarah and her children walked away from Richard's mansion, there was a feeling of finality in the air. The battle they had fought for years had finally come to a head, and the outcome was a victory, though not one Sarah had ever imagined. She had not just reclaimed a piece of her past, but she had reclaimed her dignity and the strength of her children. For Sarah, the sense of closure was overwhelming. She had endured years of pain, but now, with her twins at her side, she had proven to herself that her love, her resilience, and her determination were the true sources of power. The twins, once mere victims of circumstance, had taken control of their own futures. Their growth, from confused children to powerful young adults, was a testament to the bond Sarah had nurtured in them. Michael and Michelle had always felt the weight of their father's abandonment, but today, they stood taller, knowing that they were no longer invisible in the world Richard had created. They were part of the legacy now, not by birthright, but by their own strength and resolve. As they walked away, Sarah looked at them with pride. They had taken the past, shaped it, and turned it into something new. What had started as a story of loss and betrayal had become a story of power, not just of wealth, but of family and the unbreakable spirit that comes from love. This story carries a powerful lesson: greed destroys, but love rebuilds. Richard's empire crumbled not because of the lies he told the world, but because of the truth his children brought to light. In his attempt to control everything, he lost everything that mattered. His family, his integrity, and the respect he once demanded. Meanwhile, Sarah's love for her children had rebuilt what had been lost and created something far more valuable than anything money could buy. The twins didn't just take from Richard, no, they used his own arrogance and secrets against him. What they truly gained was a sense of justice. They had faced down the man who had abandoned them and came out victorious, not because of revenge, but because they understood that their worth wasn't tied to the wealth he had hoarded, but to the love and strength they had within themselves. If this story gripped you, share it with someone who needs to see it. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notification, we've got more jaw-dropping tales coming.